diváci a posluchači, vítejte u druhého programu z cyklu rozhovorů Mission Spring. Tuto sérii organizuje Univerzitní křesťanské hnutí, což je spolek studentů s cílem pomoci lidem na vysokých školách promyslet, prověřit a prožít křesťanskou víru. A protože náš program dneska bude celý v angličtině, už do ní rovnou přepnu. So, dear participants, whether watching or listening through Facebook live stream or Clubhouse or here on Zoom, welcome at the second program of Mission Spring series. This series is organized by UKH or UKH, the Czech branch of International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, and we try to help students to think about Christian faith. Now, the program will take about 60 minutes. The last 20 minutes we hope to be for your questions. You can send them either through the chat here at Zoom or using menti.com by entering code, which I will place into the chat straight away. And our theme today is Easter Postcard from Oxford. And this is because we have a very special guest with us. His name is Bruce Gillingham, and he is now live in Oxford. So greetings to Bruce, to Oxford. And the background behind him is not artificial background. This needs to be said because you can get all kinds of really lovely backgrounds, but this one is really his house. So thank you for having us just in your little garden. And yeah, I'll dive straight in. Tell us something about yourself, Bruce. What do you do and where exactly you live?
Well, dear Thomas, it's lovely of you to invite me into your home too. Just before I plunge into myself, I think I should say your title does attract me, a postcard from Oxford. So I should offer you a postcard from Oxford. And this is a picture of old Oxford some time ago. And here is a picture of modern Oxford, which was a view from the park where I served as a vicar for 22 years. So I bring you these two postcards from Oxford. And I should say that while I have tried to work in different places in the UK, I have been drawn back to Oxford as a chaplain. And currently I'm living here 5 miles north of Oxford in a place called Gillingham. And it's lovely to have my wife and my 2 daughters with me here. And my work currently is based at a training college, preparing leaders, some to lead in the church and some to lead in the world of work. And my job is to try and listen, try and answer questions, and try and offer support for tomorrow's leaders.
Wonderful. So we are connected with Oxford, but you are connected with the Czech Republic. There's something that goes prior to this meeting. So what connects you with the Czech Republic?
Well, Tom, the first thing that connects me with the Czech Republic is my happy memories of coming to Prague. And I thought the best picture I should show you is of the Prague skyline on a bottle of soda plum. And don't you think we had a or two with a good discussion? And so that's the first thing that connects me. But the other thing was, when I was a student, I came to faith in 1967. And in 1968, we met a student here in Oxford who'd come from Prague, or from Bratislava actually, but it was all about the Prague Spring of Alexander Dubček in 1968. And so it's lovely that your title is Mission Spring or Spring Mission. And David and I, 2 students, got to know this guy, Dalibor. We learned that his father was a pastor in Bratislava in the good old days when there was Czechoslovakia as one nation. And we felt we wanted to help. So to cut a long story short, I had some spare money. David inherited a car. We went to the Brother Andrew organization and asked, how can we help? We were led to Vienna. The Austrian Bible Society gave us some literature and some Bibles, and we had some medical equipment, and we drove from Vienna through the Iron Curtain into Bratislava in order to offer some Bibles and some support to Dalibor and his family. And from there, we were sent up to the Tatra Mountains as well, and also across to Prague. So I have 3 very moving memories of offering some life and hope through the Bibles that we were able to give in Slovak and in the Czech language. And it's a visit I shall never forget. And here's the strange thing, Tom, to come back nearly 50 years later and to have that wonderful 5 days on that lovely floating boat on the river. You took me back to your church, which was the very church that I had brought the Bibles to nearly 50 years before. It was a miracle. That's my loving connection with Prague and the whole Czech nation.
That's really lovely and unique. Well, now you are in Oxford and you have been working there as a chaplain. So you also studied there. So what did you study and where have been a chaplain, and what's your wider connection with the university?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Well, I was very privileged to be able to go as a student to a college in Oxford called Christ Church. And there I studied philosophy, politics, and economics. And we joked together and said, philosophy, why are we here? Politics, who's leading us? Economics, who's paying for all this? And so that was what we tried to think about. And it opened my mind up a bit to consider what would be my worldview. I began to realize that that needed a bit of review. So that was my time as a student. But I also went on later to be a chaplain at another college called Jesus College, where I was able to relate to a whole wide range of students, and through the Oxford pastorate began to be able to think, how do I support all kinds of students with different questions? So I've had the privilege of being a student, a chaplain at what I call one of the standard colleges, and also a chaplain at a theological college, helping to train ministers. So I've had the best of all 3 worlds in the life of Oxford University.
So when we say university chaplain, what does it actually entail? What's the character of your job?
Well, do you mind a slightly longer answer? I would describe it at 3 levels. I would say, first of all, at the physical level, we want to make sure that in student welfare, everybody is fit and well. And obviously that means eating well, sleeping enough, staying fit, exercising, and being social and connecting well. And I wanted to say that that's fine until you meet a thing like a COVID global pandemic. And then the concerns we have for physical well-being increase hugely, and we want to be able to support people and give wise advice. The second level I would describe as mental health or emotional health, quite closely tied in, where I think we're talking about concerns about parents or friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, friends at home. We're thinking also about exams, how to come up and do the best you can. You don't want to let your teachers down or your parents down. You may feel that you're very connected between education and employment. You've set your heart on a good degree. Some degrees are more theoretical, like mine was. Some are more attuned to serving in employment, engineering or law or medicine, for example. And so your future may depend on the kind of exam results you get. And so if you put mental stress and emotional turmoil together, we found, especially in the spring and the summer terms, that we needed to be counsellors as well as welfare officers. But there's a third level, Tom. There's physical, there's mental and emotional, And then there's a spiritual level. A chaplain also is responsible for offering regular worship in chapel and offering to pray for people, asking for God's wisdom and guidance, even praying for healing, and asking God to, by his Holy Spirit, to come and make a difference in our lives today, particularly when there are temptations or discussions in ethics about right and wrong, issues of guidance for the future. And these were issues where I think I came to the edge of my experience, and I needed strength and wisdom as well from God. And that's the thing about spirituality. There's a soft definition talking about ethics or music or meditation, sort of on the horizontal level, but there's a deeper interpretation and definition of spirituality. It's saying, could I actually ask the question, is there a God? What about my origin and my destiny? Who really am I in my identity? Am I formed by God? Will I meet God in the end? So these are questions, fundamental questions, which I think need a spiritual answer. So in summary, physical, mental, and spiritual support for the intelligent and inquiring student.
Wonderful. You mentioned ethics. That's a big word, and worldview. And so, how do you go about choosing worldview?
It's a good question. Well, again, I'll offer in three ways. Some people are very happy with what I would call an inherited worldview, granted to them as a gift from family and parents, maybe from school or university, or maybe from a particular hero that you have grown up with, and you've become comfortable with that framework, a way of seeing the world. And I would call that a more traditional and conservative, a more accepting style of entering the world. And you wear the glasses perhaps handed down to you, and you see the world through the lenses of those glasses that have been entrusted to you. You might call that slightly conformist. A second view would be quite reactionary to that. And let's be honest, many people in the quest for personal identity, especially in the adolescent and student years, fight back and resist and reject everything that's been handed to them and say, no, I don't want that. And of course, I became, through my student life in the 60s, which was a great time of reaction against the 40s and 50s, where liberation and freedom were in the air. And this was a liberation expressed in politics and sex and drugs, rock and roll. The whole alternative youth culture was pushed forward in order to push away inherited worldview received from an earlier generation. But there may be a third way, and I don't just mean a Hegelian view that there's thesis, antithesis, and therefore a synthesis. It may be that you decide that you're going to inspect the evidence for yourself. I'm not going to go with the inherited view from parents, nor am I going to run with the student crowd in rebellion and reaction. I want to sift this for myself and start looking and checking out in my own way, perhaps with a few close friends, to say, what worldview really stands up to scrutiny? What can I really trust? And I'm looking for a worldview that both meets my needs and experience, but is also well grounded in history. Can history and experience unite to give me a confidence that the worldview I'm choosing in the end will be both relevant and true? And that's how we set about. Different people have different reactions and different personal stories. And I'd be open to the question time to see what you think is the best way to choose a worldview for yourself.
Exactly. And you also have a special worldview. You have a Christian worldview. It's very personal. And you also had your own personal way to arrive at it. Can you share a little bit about that? Like, how did you personally arrive at that worldview?
Okay, well, Tom, that's quite a story, but I'll try and summarize. I had wonderfully been granted a place at Oxford University, as I mentioned. But in a gap year before that, I and a friend, Julian, took a ship from Southampton down to Cape Town. And in a gap year, this was a very brave adventure, actually. We started in Cape Town, and the aim was to hitchhike back through Africa to London from there, and to have an experience of meeting different cultures. It was a time of great political change in Africa, and of course that interested me in preparation for my topic at college. Now, I'll tell you two highlights in that journey. One was that when we got to Nairobi, we had the awful news that my friend Julian got from London. It was that his sister Charlotte had been knocked down by a drunk driver on the way back from her graduation party and was 3 weeks dead and buried before we knew anything about it. This was a terrible shock to our system. Julian flew back to be with his family as quickly as possible, and I was left alone in Africa with my thoughts. We were the ones at risk, actually, hitchhiking, and perhaps we should have been the one in an accident. But Charlotte, in the comfort of her own college with friends in London, the security of her own college, she was the one who had died. So my world was thrown upside down. And the second thing was this. I teamed up with another guy. We put his little car on a coastal vessel, and we sailed from Mombasa round to Kuwait. And we drove up to Baghdad and came across to the Middle East, to the Holy Land, like the wise men, across the desert from the east. And you can imagine going to Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Nazareth and beginning to open up the little New Testament and Psalms that my mother had put at the bottom of my case and saying, Lord, what is this life about? Did you live here? What's happened to Charlotte? And what am I to think about this life? It seems to be uncertain and short. It seems to be cruel and unfair. How am I to make sense of this strange experiences? And so with the death of Charlotte and with the evidence of the Middle East and the Holy Land, I ended up in Oxford. And to cut a long story short, I met some wonderful Christians who I admired for their bright intelligence, their sporting prowess, their excellence, and can I say, their social parties. They were alive in all dimensions, and I was profoundly impressed. When they invited me to an evening event, it was actually at the Union Debating Chamber, where I was already a member, and the title that night was The Impossibility of Agnosticism. In other words, you can't really say, I don't know. And the speaker said there are two reasons for that. One is you are voting with your feet and your time right now, and the way you spend your time expresses your profoundest values. And the second thing he said was, you know, Jesus said, he who is not with me is against me. So I began to realize that I could not be just, I don't know all the time. And the effect of that talk was to electrify the fence I was sitting on. And I jumped down and committed myself that day and said, yes, I'd like to learn more, but I can see instinctively that I do not want to vote against Jesus Christ. I want to say yes. And there was a way in which we did that. The man said, we don't vote in this chamber by putting up a hand or turning on a light or putting a cross on a piece of paper. We vote with our bodies by walking out through that door. And there's a brass pole down the middle of the doorway. One says yes and the other says no. And you walk one side or the other of that brass pole. And he said, the motion before the House tonight is, this House believes that Jesus Christ is Lord. Quite a short motion. And you had to say yes or no. And of course, I did that night, walk through the bar on that side. And obviously I had lots of questions. It wasn't totally clear, but I knew in my heart as well as my head that this was the right thing to do. And as they say, the rest is history.
Thank you, Bruce. That's very personal and yeah, very touching to hear about the tragic circumstances that led to your questioning life and eventually finding life with Jesus. And well, you are right. Many people make choices in their lives, especially when they're young. I think it is said that 2/3 of people make their life choices, the major ones, like who to marry and what to work um, in the college age, between 20 and 30 years of age. So let's turn to Tom, from HEP, and he's here with us, and I would like to ask him about his story.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tom, as was said before. I'm 21. I live in Cheb. It's a small town near the border with Germany in the western part of Bohemia. Right now, I'm studying economics at the University of Economics in Prague. And yeah, that's my current status.
Okay, and you also experienced a spiritual journey. What actually contributed to you starting thinking about spiritual questions?
Yeah, I have to say that apart from always being quite a curious child, I had the privilege and honor to actually be at philosophical seminar that was happening at my secondary school for 2 years. We started with all the pre-Socratic philosophers and going all the way up to the modern philosophy. And for me, it was really great because I had the opportunity to structurally observe how people started to really from the questions, for example, why they are on Earth and what happened that specifically the person who is asking the question, is alive and is privileged to walk on Earth. And I really started to think about all this stuff, all these questions. And I came to the seminar as a person who is very young. I was, I think, 16 or 17. And I didn't believe in existence of God. Maybe I wasn't able to answer these questions, but how I left this seminar was with one certainty, and the certainty was that there is a God. But still, I was so young. I was growing up in an environment that was completely out of touch with anything that was religious. Going back all to my grandparents and great-grandparents, I didn't know about anybody who was somehow connected to some religious beliefs and religious practices. So I basically didn't have anybody to ask. So I just said to myself at that time that, okay, there is a God, but I do not know who he is or how can I find him? And I just left it there. But still, as I said, it was the end of my secondary school. I had before my university studies. And this really was the time of just deciding like what to do with my life, how to form my steps, who should I be, who should I want to be, and what is the purpose actually of studying. So at that time, when I was 19, I started to form more complex questions, and I wanted to find a meaning actually to myself and all the world, to be better, to be better than, for example, my parents, because I'm from family who is separate. My parents, they got divorced, and since I was a child, I knew that something is not right, but I just didn't know, like, how can I be different? How can I succeed in living sustainably? Yeah, and that's all to the question.
Thank you. And I actually bumped into you a little bit further on in the story, and you were right at the end of your secondary school. It was in Prague. It was actually also when Bruce was in Prague. What happened? What triggered? What helped further search? And how was it connected to your holiday and so on?
Yeah, so me and my friends, Sonny and Joachim, he is religious, he's Christian, and we've been best friends for years. We decided to go for a vacation to Israel for 1 week. And just before that, I was asked to attend a talk from some professor from Oxford, I didn't know, at Czech University, before just the 1 day prior to our departure to Israel itself. And since I was always curious and I would think to know more, I said, yeah, let's do it. It sounds like fun. So we went to the talk, and I went there with basically no expectations, but actually I left with an itinerary for my journey, and also with a book, because I received Mark's Gospel at the end of the talk. And I have to say, I little bit felt like the Frodo Baggins, who received a quest to go to Rivendell to get the ring from his home from in Shires to all the way to Rivendell, which was very unknown because after the talk, when I was speaking to Bruce, he asked me something which wasn't quite common for me, which I wasn't easy to grasp. But he asked me to go to the church he had service in many years before, and to recall the memories of our conversation, and possibly also to pronounce Jesus Christ as my Lord, which sounded a little bit crazy to me at the time, but I was curious and I was adventurous, so at least I wanted to go to that church to see how beautiful it is. And I did so, actually. And with Mark's Gospel as my guidance in Jerusalem, in Israel, for like, I would say, very first time, I started to feel that my questions are no longer those questions, those complex questions lying somewhere in the space. They started to have some answers to them, and I have to say that this really provided me with the second look that was able to give me some answers. So yeah.
That's great. And there was a flight home. And how was the flight home different to the flight to Israel? And how did your life continue?
Well, the flight home was actually an occasion for me to finish all of the Mark's Gospel. So it was night. Everybody was sleeping. Joachim was sleeping. Sonny was maybe listening to some music, and I was finishing the Gospel. And when I completed it and I thought of Jesus' sacrifice, I felt like I do not need to ask anymore, since I have a way for me that would be a sufficient and great answer to all the things that troubled me. And I have to say that the specific Mark's Gospel that I received, issued by Christian Union, was really, really such a great thing for me, because it wasn't a big black book with a lot of words that weren't touching and weren't like speaking to me. It was also filled with questions and guidance that it was possible for someone who is actually traveling to finish it and to grasp all of the philosophy and everything. And I knew that this is actually the moment I have to be decisive at. So I didn't do it at the church Bruce was talking about, but I did it in a plane, and I pronounced myself as a person who wants to follow Jesus, who wants to be with God, and who wants to really live sustainable life with a meaning, and which is full of love and dedicated to family and friends and community, and not only to selfishness. I didn't want to strive for like satisfaction of some stuff that is actually not relevant to my life. I wanted to live really for something that has a value. Yeah.
But what difference did it make in your further life? How does your faith survive?
Thanks to the great support, not only from my community that I found in our church in Heb, but also mainly to Joachim, my friend. I was able to continue on my journey. I remember going to Sunday gatherings, and at the first one I was so amazed by all the love that was there, all the big families that were there. I wasn't quite used to being around that. And for example, I was at one disciple course. I have to say that, for example, it really changed the way I think about, for example, time. Before my turning to Christ, I always thought of life as like two-way journey. I mean, like from point A to point B, from birth to death. Now I think about it in different terms, actually. I think about it as a journey, like from God to God, which is really so much relieving for me, since I do not have to fear the past passage of time, and that I have to always do the best things, and I always have to spend my time in the best possible way. Yeah, it gives me a lot of free space for myself. And also, when you just accept the fact that you weren't born by accident, by chance, you were born something. I think it's really so much easier to just do things.
Thank you, Tom. That's a fascinating story. And I have just one last quick question for you before we turn back to Bruce. And that is, okay, what recommendations would you have to someone who is testing and checking if Christian faith is the right worldview? What would be your guidance for him or her?
Okay, my guidance, yeah. I was thinking about this for a long time, and maybe the first thing that is needed is not strive for not to be recognized as much as to recognize yourself. I think this is a very, very important step. As the first one, you should try to know yourself. You should also be open-minded about your decisions. So if you are asked to go to visit the talk that is done by some professor you just don't know, like, why not to do it? Just be open to your choices about the life, and accept what is given to you. Don't be afraid, and don't be shy. I think these are the great first steps. And then maybe if you have such great friends as I had and I have, you'll be able to find your faith. I also want to thank just Christian Union, because if there wasn't for that talk, if there wasn't for that Mars Gospel, I don't know what would happen. No one knows. And it's just, yeah, I'm just very grateful.
Thank you, Tom. And Bruce, we've heard this story, and there might be people really weighing up different worldviews, and they feel that they have to make a decision, but how to make an informed decision, how to choose a worldview which is true, and we know that there's good evidence about it.
Yes. Well, can I go back to your wonderful title, A Postcard from Oxford? And I'd like to show you two more. One is Oxford in the winter. It's very beautiful in a way, but it's quite cold. And we've had some snow this year, and it's not, I know you have more than we have, but that's been quite cold. And here's a second one. And this is, of course, springtime. And it changes from the snow keeping us cold until the sun comes and melts a bit, and we feel new life coming. So I was really intrigued and interested that Tom was referring to Tolkien's great quest of the ring to Rivendell. And I need to tell you that very close to our college, there is a lovely pub called the Eagle and Child, and that's where C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien used to meet on Tuesdays for a rather liquid lunch, and they would share their writings together. And one of the ones that impacted me was The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. It's the Narnia stories, and you could say it's quite childish, and it is at one level. But like all parables, it has a deeper level as well. And there's a phrase that I can show you from the winter to the spring, where the picture is of the White Witch that holds the world in a kingdom of fear. And the phrase is, in the kingdom of the White Witch, it's always winter, but never Christmas. And that, I think, touched Lewis. He wrote it, and he had his own challenges. And he was wondering whether this idea of a God coming into our world, or a dying and a rising God, was another example of the Roman or the Greek myths. And in a walk around the grounds at Magdalen College, where Lewis was professor, Tolkien said to him, I wonder if you could think that in the case of Jesus Christ, this is in fact a true myth. Well, of course, that's a paradox. Is a myth a fairy story? And if it is, how can it be true? But there's a deeper meaning of myth. Myth is a story which carries within it the meaning of our existence in the world. And Lewis' eyes were opened that night, and he began to consider whether Jesus Christ has been the one who shows us not just a worldview I like, but a worldview that's true. And Lewis, in another place, writes, I believe in the sun, not because I can see the sun when it rises, but in the light of the sun, I see everything else so clearly. So that's what Jesus Christ did for C.S. Lewis. It helped him to revise his worldview. It helped him to realize that it was Christ that was the center of things and made sense of his own experience, and indeed the whole experience of humanity. And so I want to say, yes, anybody can go in quest, and I'd be very interested to think about diversity here. I was a chaplain also to the bishop in Birmingham, and of course that's a very diverse culture. Well, Oxford is as well now. And so I'm very open to the discussion about diversity. And what I would say about that straight away is, many people feel that different worldviews are equal ways of climbing up a mountain to consider the way to God. But maybe in the Christian case, it's different. It's not so much man or humanity in search of God, but in the case of Jesus Christ, you see God in search of mankind. And suddenly everything's turned upside down. So instead of me choosing a worldview, I discover that Christ is in search of me. And so that's what I would suggest about the quest of how to evaluate different worldviews, beliefs, values, and religions today.
Thank you. Much of what you've said relates to Jesus's death and resurrection. Is there evidence about it? Because after all, we are in the middle of Easter tomorrow, Easter Sunday. Is there any really good evidence about Jesus's death and resurrection?
Good question, Thomas. It's a kind of $1 million question, really. I'll put it first of all in background and then in foreground. We believe that there is good evidence coming from the time of Christ in two areas there, in archaeology and in documents. Let's think, there's something called the burnt house, which if you dig down in Jerusalem, you will get back to the time of Christ. And there they have found, well, two things. One is a crucified skeleton with nails through it, and the other is a spearhead. So it gives us a framework to say that this is not just myth. This gives us an archaeological context for the documents. And the second is that these New Testament documents rest on the Old Testament. And the Dead Sea Scrolls provided us with new documents which were 1,000 years earlier than the ones we had before. And especially a completely intact Isaiah scroll. And so if you were willing to read Isaiah chapter 53, well, particularly 52:12 to 52:13 to 53:12, you will see that there's a prophecy of a suffering servant. So if you put the archaeology, and then you have the document, and then you start looking at the New Testament, it begins to slot in like a wonderful jigsaw piece into a context. It seems to fit. And if you were to press me, say, what's the best evidence for this? I would say, I want you to meet a third Thomas. We've met Thomas in Prague, Tom in Heb on the border. What about Thomas, the disciple, who was absent when Jesus is said to have appeared to his friends to start with? And he had a very skeptical worldview. He said, unless I see this for myself, in fact, I need to put my finger in the marks of the nails where he was crucified. I need to put my hand in his side. And unless I do that, I will not believe. So very graciously, John's Gospel, particularly chapter 20, shows us that Jesus kindly came back a week later and effectively said to the scientist Thomas, okay, Thomas, run your tests now. Here's my hands, here's my side. Stop your doubting and believe. But believe on this evidence. Well, you know what? I'm very grateful that Thomas, the third Thomas, did that doubting, because he did my doubting for me. And he did the test. And I'm convinced, not just by the wonderful idea of the empty tomb and the stone rolled away, not just because of the resurrection appearances, there's so many, but uniquely that testimony of Thomas, skeptical Thomas, is, I think, a 21st century witness that appeals to us as a fantastic example of someone who was helped by the evidence to move from doubt to faith. And I would commend a study of John chapter 20 to look for yourself and see what Thomas discovered.
That's very helpful, Bruce. Thank you. That was really $1 million question. But we have $2 million question now, which is okay. I'm fairly convinced about the evidence for resurrection. How do I actually start journey of discovery today? How do I bring it to the start of Christian life if I want to today, from external examination to personal quest?
Well, that's a very profound and personal question, Tom. May I be very simple here? And it's sometimes the way I describe this to people who want to make a simple start. Sometimes we have a deep medical need. In fact, I will put it to you this way. Here's another bottle to show you. Corona. And this is quite a popular beer over in Britain. But of course, if you add the virus to it, it becomes quite threatening. So sometimes there's either an event in history which impresses you, or an encounter in your own story which stops you, and you need some medicine from God. And in Britain, the doctors say, you need a teaspoon of this medicine. TSP is the shorthand. And the way I would describe it is TSP. Thank you, sorry, please. And so the T is to say just talk to God as you would talk to a friend on the phone, and say, thank you, Lord, for this wonderful word, for the gift of life. Thank you for this character of Jesus. Thank you for this amazing offer of life. I need to check it. Then the S. I'm sorry for this world that's gone so wrong, for this pandemic, for exploitation, for criminal behavior, and for my participation in sins of things that I forgot to do and things that I've said and done which I deeply regret. I'm sorry, please forgive me. And the third one I'd say is P is please. Please, Lord, if you're real, be real to me. I can see that you were real to your disciples, but I want to come back to the cross and understand why that happened. I want to be more sure of the resurrection, the empty tomb and the appearances. Above all, I need to encounter you now by the power of your Holy Spirit. If your Spirit is active now and can reach to me beyond history and across the world, could you speak to me and reassure me? And in fact, come into my life. Please come in and stay with me and change me and show me and guide me and give me some good friends, because I know I can't make this journey on my own. Thank you. Sorry. Please. TSP.
Thank you, Bruce. That's very concrete and very helpful for anyone who maybe hasn't talked to God yet. That's very simple prayer, conversation with God. Thank you so much, Bruce. We are really reaching the end of our program, and we did promise that it will be 60 minutes, and we are filling them up. And thank you so much for joining all the way from Oxford, and we appreciate your precious time spent with us. We also thanks to Tom, who was able to share his story, which was very personal and wonderful. It's both personal, wonderful, and powerful. And we also thank to anyone who joined us, whether here or through Facebook or through Clubhouse. You are warmly welcome to join our 30 minutes Bible study to explore a little bit more the third Thomas's story. That will be done in Czech, so no worries about English. We will look into John's Gospel, chapter 20, at a few verses, and just ask a few questions that will help us to discover what actually happened in Thomas when he had doubts. He did have doubts about risen Jesus. So we can look at that for 30 minutes just after this Zoom. So Bruce,
Tom, can I just say a thank you from Oxford? It's wonderful to be included in your evening here. And one last postcard from Oxford as I go. This is a picture of the Bridge of Sighs. It's a replica from Venice, from the Doge's palace to the prison. And it's built in Hertford College, opposite the Sheldonian, where we receive our degrees. Over the top of that staircase, it says in Venice, "Abandon hope, all you who enter here, because there's no way back." And I think that's been the message in our culture, with so many people dying of coronavirus all over the world. My prayer, yesterday was Good Friday, tomorrow is Easter Day, is that you can recover hope, all you who enter here. God bless you, Thomas, and all your work in Prague and throughout the Czech Republic, and indeed throughout Europe. Thank you for your leadership. God bless you, and happy Easter.